The world is coming undone. Imperial flags reign across the galaxy.
Can you be trusted without your shackles?
Let's just get this over with, shall we?
We've a mission for you. A major weapons test is imminent. We need to know how to destroy it.
There isn't much time. Every day they grow stronger.
There is a 97.6% chance of failure.
He means well.
This is our chance to make a real difference. Are you with me?
All the way.
May the Force be with us.
Welcome to episode number 60 of the My Nerd World Star Wars podcast. I am your host, Jon Justice, back from an extended hiatus, a little bit longer than I had anticipated, but I am back for your, what'll hopefully be your weekly look at the world of Star Wars and that galaxy far, far away, time permitting. I just got done with a massive move. We'll talk a bit about that in the podcast as it relates to Star Wars, because I learned something, something new about my Star Wars fandom in the middle of this move, and sort of the larger impact that Star Wars has on my life. So we'll get into that during the podcast this week. We got a lot of news to run through. What I've basically gone and done is I've kind of cherry picked over the course of the past few weeks exactly what stuff I want to talk about, because there's been a lot of information that has come out in the course of the past month or so for episode number 60. But I am glad that you're with us. And for those that have been waiting for another podcast, my apologies. It took. I was actually hoping to get a new podcast out last week, and it just didn't. It just didn't shake out that way. But everything is kind of settling down for me here at home. I'm settling into the new job, and so I hope to get back to a weekly look again at the Star Wars universe, talk movies, talk books, video games, and just basically the fandom and everything going on in the world of Star Wars. So this is episode number 60. We'll start off with just a bit of information. If you ever want to email me, you can do so at talkshownerd@gmail.com, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Jon Justice. A bit of a programming note as it relates to the podcast itself. Depending on what platform you are listening on, specifically iTunes, because of my new job here in Minneapolis, this podcast has been renamed to the Jon Justice and My Nerd World podcast, and will be the sole location for the podcast, not my radio show. So for those that are looking to listen to my radio show, for those that didn't listen in Tucson or were in other parts of the country that were used to hearing my show, what you can do is, and I would encourage you to, go and find my new show on iTunes, Justice and Drew. Justice and Drew on iTunes. It's Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130. And we post all 3 hours of the show, and then the weekly post-show podcasts will be available and are available on the Justice and Drew feed. You can also find that on the iHeartRadio app as well. So the podcast that you're listening to now, if you're listening to it on iTunes, is again going to be the sole location for just the Star Wars podcast, the Dale Jr. podcast, the Depeche Mode podcast, which I'll be starting very soon as they complete work on their latest album. And hopefully we're going to roll the podcast into the Twin Cities News Talk podcast network. At least that's the plan. The radio station that I work for has an abundance of podcasts that they showcase on a lot of different topics, not just political. So we're hoping to take at least well, for certain, the Star Wars podcast, possibly the Dale Jr. podcast, but that might wait until next year, given the fact that Dale Jr. is out with his concussion issues for the rest of the season. But we're here to talk Star Wars. I just moved. So I was living in Tucson, Arizona. That's where I've been with my family, my wife and 2 boys, for the past 9 years. And I came to the conclusion with this move that, you know, if you stay in a house any longer than 3 years, the move becomes exponentially more difficult. I think that's redundant. It becomes exponentially difficult. It becomes more difficult. You know, the first year you move into a place, you're kind of still unpacking for the year. The second year, you're kind of settling in and really not accumulating a whole bunch of stuff because, you know, you're only in the second year of the house. When you get into the third year of the house, that's when things start to add up. And we've been there for about 4 years. We're still far from unpacked. The garage is basically just full of boxes. It looks like bombs have gone off in them. Thankfully, and this is the part where Star Wars comes in before we get to the topics of the show today. We're going to cover a lot of Rogue One news, toy news, artwork has come out, some new books that I want to share with you. We will get into the international trailer. Somebody had asked, a fan of the show, I believe it was Tony, I'm sorry, a friend of the show, Tony, had been wanting to hear my Rogue One trailer review, and I commented to him on Twitter and then realized, and I told him, hey, that's coming this weekend. But I actually realized that I did that review in episode number 59 about a month ago. I will be talking about the international trailer because I did not get a chance to talk about the international trailer in the last podcast. And the intro that you heard, the first part of it, was actually an edited audio version of the Rogue One, the most recent Rogue One trailer. So I've been able to unpack and set up my office and my room. That's what I like to do to get that done first, since I immediately had to go to work after about a 2.5-day trip here to Minneapolis, and that was about 2 weeks ago now. You know, and I came to the conclusion that, not the conclusion, but I had a further realization as it relates to my Star Wars fandom, and that is Star Wars is home. And I know that sounds weird. Maybe not for you because you're a Star Wars fan, but in this massive transition, brand new job, in terms of talk radio, the number of changes that I've gone through is probably, you know, some of the biggest ones. Biggest market, joining another individual who is hosting the show with me. Thankfully, he happens to be a good friend of mine, and we have an amazing relationship. Meeting a new producer. Thankfully, we have hit it off well. She is absolutely fantastic. But there's been a lot of changes. It's a brand new city we've never lived in before. We've lived in Grand Rapids, Michigan for a couple of years, but my boys don't remember it because one of them was born there, and then we left, and the other one was really young at the time. It doesn't remember. So this has been just a big uprooting after 9 years in Tucson here to Minneapolis, and I can't tell you. Well, I can tell you because I'm going to tell you. That's the point of this part of the podcast. Just how great Star Wars has been in helping with that transition. Because, you know, I mean, we have our family, and you're in a new place, and you have a new job you have to go to, and you have to learn roads. But when I'm unpacking my stuff, my fun stuff, my Star Wars collection, I mean, I've got surrounded by it right now. Calendar, my Spiro BB-8. My mom got me this amazing little BB-8 mini fridge. I have this whole BB-8 section going on in my office. And to framed pictures, I'm looking at a picture of my father with me and a stormtrooper at Disneyland from about 3 or 4 years ago. I've got a majority of my toys out, not all of them because I haven't set them all up yet. But once I began unpacking all of my Star Wars collection, it became home. There was just such a level of joy and comfort that is attached to all these material possessions, and you know, it just was very, and I guess comforting is the best word. We have, you know, between that, the fact that my boys and Melinda, my wife, really handled the move really well. One of the first movies I watched, and this wasn't intentional by any stretch. I'd gotten the TV set up. Melinda came about a day behind me when we visited here. her stepmom, or her mom had came to visit. She drove up with her because we drove separately. And I remember I'd listened to Star Wars podcasts on the way up, and so it was kind of just percolating in the background. And I think it was almost like a security blanket. I kind of clung to my Star Wars and kind of kept it in the forefront of my mind during the journey, just to keep with that familiarity. And that's really what I'm talking about, is the familiarity of all of it and how much joy it brings me. And when we finally got everything set up and we had a place to sit, one day I threw in The Force Awakens. And it was one of the most enjoyable viewings of that film. And it was funny because the family, my boys and Melinda, just throughout the course of watching the film, I started it in the middle of the day. I think it was on a Saturday. They all began to come around and join me. And we all sat down and ended up watching The Force Awakens together. And, and they hadn't done that in a while. We hadn't really watched it all as a group since we bought the Blu-ray. And even then, I think the boys were kind of popping in and out because we'd seen it several times in the theater not too long before. But it was a viewing of the movie, apart from the first time I watched it, that I will never forget. Just because that, to me, was the moment where I went, we're home. And I know it sounds cheesy and probably really cliche, but like the Han Solo and Chewbacca arrival on the Millennium Falcon and the Chewie we're home moment, I mean, it just got me in the feels. I mean, just really, really got me in the feels. And I love Star Wars so much. And it is, thank you to George Lucas for providing this universe and the people that have been involved in it for so many years. This is why it is so popular. This is why it is so important to people's lives. It's down the list on the things that are most important, in my life, be it God and my family, my wife, my boys, work. But it's in that top 5, top 10, man. And waking up in the morning and going to work and doing my stuff surrounded by, and to a part, look, and partly it's not just all Star Wars. It's my other joys in life too that extend beyond my family. The creature comforts, my fandom of Dale Earnhardt Jr. But that's been set aside because my favorite driver is out for the rest of the season with a concussion, and so Star Wars ended up shouldering that burden. Again, my love of music and Depeche Mode, the band Depeche Mode. They're working on a new album, but there's been no information left. So it was really just Star Wars that told me that I was finally here at home. And I wanted to share that with you, and I hope that as a fan and a person who listens to this podcast, if you've been listening to this podcast, that you're able to take something away from that. I know the podcasts that I enjoy are the ones where I'm connecting with the people in the podcast. Those are the ones that I have the most joy out of, that I get the most enjoyment from. And it's interesting too, because as we begin to get into the news here, because I've talked long enough on this, some of the podcasts that I've been listening to, and I won't name names. There's a lot of cynicism going on right now. Quite a bit of negativity. It is really weird. And it's coming from a couple of different podcasts. And I haven't quite put my finger on it. I have an idea. I have an idea of where the cynicism is coming from. And where some of the... No, I guess there really isn't any other word to use. A lot of discussion swirling around Rogue One. A lot of discussion swirling around Rebels. Season 3 is about to begin. Season 2, the Blu-ray just came out. I haven't had a chance to sit down and watch it yet, but I'm looking forward to it. Because if you haven't watched Rebels on Blu-ray, you are missing out. Watching it on TV, even if it's HD, does not even come close to matching the quality of the Blu-ray for Rebels. And I cannot wait to put in Season 2 and work through it up until that. I mean, I want to go beginning to end on it, but I think I may have to skip to Twilight of the Apprentice. But I do have a thought, and actually I'm going to make a note of it right now before I forget negativity. Why there's some negativity in the fandom right now. And again, it could just be a byproduct of other things going on in the world, especially this ridiculous election. But we'll talk about that when I get into the Rogue One trailer. So let's get into some of the news. Quite a bit of